Locke here for her first time ever to the Poison Pen. Please give her a warm welcome. Since this is her first time, I'm going to actually give you a full intro, which I rarely do. But Attica Locke's Pleasantville was the 2016 winner of the Harper Lee Prize for Legal Fiction. It was also longlisted for the Bailey's Prize for Women's Fiction and made numerous Best of 2015 lists. Her first novel, Blackwater Rising, was nominated for an Edgar Award, an NAACP Image Award, as well as the Los Angeles Times Book Prize, and was shortlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction. Her second book, The Cutting Season, is a national bestseller and the winner of the Ernest Gaines Award for Literary Excellence. A former fellow at the Sundance Institute's Feature Filmmakers Lab, Locke has worked as a screenwriter as well. Most recently, she was a writer and producer on the Fox drama Empire. She serves on the board of the Library Foundation of Los Angeles. A native of Houston, Texas, Attica lives in Los Angeles, California with her husband and daughter. And this is kind of outdated. Her new book is BLUEBIRD, and it's a wonderful book. There's so much to talk about. So it's an honor to have you here, Attica.
It is an honor to be here. Thank you for having me.
Now, BLUEBIRD.
Oh my God, I'm going to be looking at the camera the whole time. I'll try not to do that.
BLUEBIRD. There's so much to talk about in this book. It's set in Texas, and the first thing I wanted to ask you about was kind of, sort of love-hate relationship with Texas.
I have one.
Tell us a little bit about that. What it means to be a Texan. This book really explores that.
I come from a long line of Black Texans. And in fact, my family story is the flip side of the Great Migration. If we, a lot of us know a lot of stories about Black folks getting out of Dodge in the South and getting out of the Jim Crow South to go to Chicago, Detroit, Gary, New York, Phoenix, California. My family stayed, and we are defined by the fact that we stayed. And part of that, there's a line in the book that's about the main character's family, which you could say the same about my family. That there was this sense that a feeling that we somehow had the stones to endure hard shit, and so that was probably the most Texan thing about us. That we basically could not be run off. That we had land, we were going to farm that land, and my family basically out of growing cotton and corn on their own land, put a bunch of people through college, graduate school, made lawyers, army colonels, professors, and all this coming up out of the dirt. And so for me, my love for Texas comes from a very kind of agrarian place and an appreciation for my ancestors' stick-to-itiveness and fortitude and willingness to say no. You need to say no. In fact, the book is dedicated to all of my ancestors. And I just added who said no. Because there is a flip side to stand your ground. There is the way we imagine it when we think of awful stories and awful human beings like George Zimmerman. But there's another side to stand your ground, which you could be talking about Texas or the country itself, which is, I built this and I'm not going anywhere. And the state is not going to be defined by its worst impulses. And the country will not be defined by its worst impulses. It's not that you don't have to deal with Charlottesville. It's that Charlottesville is not fundamentally going to define what America is.
Right.
Now, does Texas break my heart consistently? Do I think their politics are totally crazy? I don't live there. Let's make that clear. I love it from afar. I don't live there, and politically I do think what's happening at the state level, what they bring to D.C. is crazy. But at the same time, I can't hate what made me, and I can't take away the fact that when I go home, what I'm connected to is not necessarily what's going on currently politically, but thinking about the people who fought and continue to fight against that.
Right, and it seems like, like Texas, Arizona and Phoenix is... batshit crazy politically.
Yeah.
I'm not making a stretch to say that, but it's also a state and a city, Phoenix, of great contradictions.
Yes.
And you really see that in the book. And Texas is such obviously a huge state, and it doesn't have one particular identity, does it? I mean, it's got different regions. East Texas East Texas is very, very different from...
It is, I like to call it Louisiana's fraternal twin, because it's right along the border, and it has infinitely more in common with the South than it does with the Southwest. It's not big sky country, it's not dusty ranches or anything like that. They call it the Big Thicket. It's full of woods and piney woods and bayous and just creeks with cypress trees and moss and all this kind of stuff. So it looks a little bit more like Louisiana, and so it is its own particular thing. And from that, you could say that it also, like the South, has had in its history a virulent strain of racism. That my family certainly grew up around. But what I also know to be true about the South and about black and white folks in the South is that, which I tried to capture in the book, which is the sense of the contradiction, the sense of, yes, Jasper, Texas is real. What happened to James Byrd is real. Yes, oh my God, Sandra Bland, that is real. But there's also, in an everyday sense, there's a sense of black and white folks, the ways in which they interact with each other that is familial, for better or worse. It's just you've been living up against each other for hundreds of years. So I've said before that I have a theory in a certain way that part of the reason why shit jumps off in the American South is that people are actually living up under each other. Whereas a city like Chicago is one of the most segregated cities in the country. So I think when you're actually living up under each other, you get both the familial side of it, and you also get the cantankerous, contentious trouble.
Right. And there's an awful lot in this book, obviously, about the law, and all of its ramifications. Does the law, is it really there to protect and serve us?
Right.
And maybe talk a little bit about your protagonist. Darren Matthews. If you haven't read the book, he's a Texas Ranger, and what a great character.
Thank you very much. He's a black Texas Ranger. I have said my whole life I would never write a cop. I just felt like it's not my worldview. That's part of it's also, I kind of like people who solve crimes that that's not their job, so it's kind of interesting they have to figure it out. I mean, if it's your job as a cop to do it, it's not, for me, I thought it wasn't as interesting. But I also just didn't think I had a worldview that I could see the world through the lens of institutional authority. But when I was thinking about that, I wanted to do this series along Highway 59. Each book a different town, a different story. Because all of my family is from towns along Highway 59 in East Texas. I knew that I needed a character that was somehow could move from, up and down this highway. And I was thinking, who has that kind of authority? And the Texas Rangers, fundamentally, they're on the range. That's what they do. They are not necessarily bound. They're bound by region to a certain degree, but not necessarily. They can get called in anywhere at any time. So then I thought, my God, okay, I'm talking about writing a cop. And then I remembered I read the book Ghetto Side. I don't know if anybody read that book by Joe Leovi, but that had a huge impact on me because that book takes place, it's a nonfiction book studying crime in South LA. And it features a black cop who has chosen to live in South LA, to live where he polices. And what that book posits is that as much as we talk about the over-policing of black life, as much as that is a serious fatal problem in this country, the under-policing of black life, the under-prosecuting of crimes against black life is actually how this country was founded, and may be actually more detrimental than we give credit for. That statistically, when there is the loss of black life, doesn't matter who committed the crime, the level of prosecution is always weaker than if anybody of any other racial group, Latino, white, whatever, got murdered. And so it fits the pattern that from the beginning and with slavery, that black life has been devalued, and that when there's a crime against black life, it's not treated with the same kind of zealousness. And the black cop in that book, and she goes through incredible statistics about trying to figure out how even you then come up with how the lack of a solid authority and an institutional system that you can count on, the lack of that is how you get the mob in southern Italy. It's how you get gangs. Because in the absence of a system you can count on, people just start making the shit up themselves. And then you have all these ramifications. But the black cop in that book, it said he was choosing to live where he policed because that was his way of saying Black Lives Matter. Now, if that movement hadn't happened yet, I'm putting words into his mouth. But his idea of, I'm going to be there to stand up for the people in this community, made me think of Darren Matthews, my character, as somebody who's saying, I'm going to be there to stand my ground for black folks in Texas. That I'm going to make sure that where there is a race crime, it doesn't get swept under the rug by anybody, even the Texas Rangers.
Right. Well, and he also has that whole history to deal with. You know, the whole history of the Texas Rangers, and what that means for Texas pride and Texas identity, all that kind of stuff. Did you have to do? Is there a long? Well, another thing I wanted to point out that you mentioned early on in the book is that the whole Ranger credo of Ranger first, gender, race second. I think that was really important.
Right.
But does it really work that way?
Well, I've never been a Ranger, and I certainly, I talked to one, and I certainly did my share of research, but then also gave myself permission to make shit up. But what I do understand is that any kind of, whether you're talking about the Army or police beat or even firemen, the collective and the group, people survive by assuming a common identity, that we're all kind of in this together. But if you are a woman, and there at any given time, I think right now there are only 150 or 152 Rangers. It's a finite number at all times, and in order for there to be more Rangers, like the state legislature has to pass a law for you to add numbers. And there actually are black Rangers. There are maybe, out of that 150, 152, maybe 6 or 7 of them. There are maybe 13 Latinos, but there's 2 women. Really? So the idea that you can be all Ranger first, or you could be in a group where you put that common identity first, doesn't quite work if you're only one of 2 women in the whole thing. And if you're one of a handful of black folks, it doesn't quite work that way, even though that's the culture.
Well, yeah, I mean, the reason I asked is because Darren is kind of constantly asking that question throughout the book.
Right.
This is the way it should work, but does it really work that way?
So Darren Matthews was raised by 2 identical twin uncles. His father died at the end of the Vietnam War, and he'd been running around with a country girl. There's some class issues in there too, intra-racial class issues, where the Matthews family had money and a farm, and she was basically bayou trash, just didn't come from anything. And she was pregnant when Darren's father died, and when she had the baby, his uncle swooped in and took that baby and said she was not good enough basically to raise their nephew. So these 2 identical twin uncles are people who have opposing views. One of them in the book was a Ranger who believed that the badge in the right hands is the thing that can protect us and save us, where his identical twin brother was a former criminal defense attorney and constitutional law professor who said no, the law, that was a Freudian slip. The law is a lie. The law is the thing that black folks need protection from. And so Darren grew up caught between this ideological divide and tried to go a different way. He was in law school. He went to undergraduate school at Princeton. He went to the University of Chicago Law School and had every intention of becoming either a criminal defense attorney, maybe he would go into corporate law, and was not ever going to come back to Texas. His thing was, the real way for black uplift is I'm getting out of here. I'm getting out of these little towns. And then Jasper, Texas happened. He was in the book. He calls it he says that was my 9/11. That was the point that something shifted in him. That he was in law school, went to go get a sandwich in the lounge, and on the news, on every cable channel, was this round-the-clock coverage of the dragging death of James Byrd Jr. in a town that was not even 100 miles from where he was from. And that he both felt a sick kind of shame and rage about where he's from, about his country, about his home state, but that he also felt fury at the white northerners around him clucking their tongue and saying Texas with a kind of disdain when he knew Texas to be something more than that one incident. But it called him to duty, and he walked out of law school and became a state trooper, which is the first step in becoming a Texas Ranger, and decided that that was going to be his way of contributing, that he wanted to wear the badge.
And wife Lisa says, no bueno.
yeah. He has a wife who's, first of all, she's, to show you again the complexity of Texas, she's a girl who grew up in Houston, so she doesn't have, and Darren grew up in a tiny little town on a farm. So for him, the rural, red dirt of East Texas is something that's romantic to him. She grew up in Houston. She drives a Lexus. She's in St. John Ned's going to her law firm. She's not thinking about all that kind of stuff. So to her, the Lone Star swagger doesn't mean anything to her. And so the idea also is that why can't other people go do that stuff? Why do you have to go out and do the difficult stuff? I happen to be married to somebody who, my husband is a public defender and has an impulse to serve. And he's the kind of guy who, this is not comparable to being a cop in any way, but he's the kind of person who anything he sees on the street, whether it be a broken electrical transformer, whether he saw some people engaged in a fight that looks dangerous, he always is the one to stop and call and make sure somebody is coming out to deal with it. Whereas I just drive by like, oh, somebody else will get that. Right. And there are people who drive by and just say, that's somebody else's problem, and there are other people for whom they feel compelled to engage and act. And she married one of those.
Gotcha. So, I'm wondering how much we can give away by talking. But let's talk a little bit about the plot that kind of gets this story going. You have this small town of Lark.
Yes.
On 59.
Yes.
And this wonderful character, I'm going to blow her name. Geneva Sweet is her name. Tell us a little bit about her.
Geneva Sweet runs Geneva Sweet Sweets. It's a cafe. She's known for her fried pies, and basically it's essentially a black cafe on the highway that's been there since the late 60s and was born of an idea of when black folks traveling the highway couldn't stop anywhere else, they could stop in her place. And it's an eclectic, there's a jukebox there playing blues and Charlie Pride, country, and there is the regulars that are sitting there having their coffee and all this kind of stuff. There's also a little section off to the side where you can get a haircut if you're on the road. It's kind of an eclectic place, and she's been there for years. She is a widow. Her husband was not a famous blues guitarist, but somebody was on his way to fame when he met her and gave up everything to park it in Lark and make a life with her. And she lives across the street from a man named Wally Jefferson, who lives in an exact replica of Monticello, who thinks quite highly of himself. He's a very wealthy, although it's not clear where he gets his money from, a very wealthy white man in, $800 horn gator boots. Just, the kind of guy that walks in with the swagger and the big belt buckle. And he and she, they are across the street from each other. And they've known each other for 40, 50 years. And there is a sense of the familial intention about them. But also familiar. He's like a bully that she tolerates. He owns almost all the land in this little town, but he doesn't own where her place is. And he's kind of on her every now and then to sell it to him. And you kind of get a sense he's just doing it to mess with her. But he comes in, she'll pour his coffee before he asks. It's a routine. She'll take his money, but they're not friends. And her way of tolerating his bullish behavior is to give him nothing. She is an interesting character. So in this tiny little town of maybe 178 people, 2 bodies wash up in a bayou in a week. The first is a the first is a lawyer from Chicago, a black man, who was passing through. And then about 3 days later, the body of a local white woman, I should say, washes up, found in similar circumstances, and nobody understands how these 2 deaths are connected. And Darren, when he hears about it, feels a kind of surge of, this is the kind of stuff I got into this job. This is why I wear the badge. There's rumblings that maybe this crime has something to do with the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas. So he takes it on himself to go into Lark. Now, when we meet him in the book, he's on suspension. So he has no business going anywhere looking into anything, but he does. And the lawyer's wife, this incredibly cosmopolitan black woman who's a photographer who was in Europe when she got a call, your husband's gone, flew from, well, no, I think it was said in the book she had to take a train from where she was to London, then get a flight from London to New York, then get that flight from Dallas and rent a car and drive into Shelby County. She has no idea where she is. And I mean that like she doesn't get where she is. She's somebody who thinks she can walk into any old kind of redneck bar and just start asking questions. And so she ends up bumping up into Darren, and the two of them try to figure out what happened to her husband. That she and her husband were actually estranged from each other. So she has no idea why he got in a car one day and drove to Texas.
Can you say a little bit about why Darren's on suspension?
I can. It goes back
early
to
in the book.
It is. It's very early in the book, and it goes back to this confusion about when is it okay for a black law enforcement officer to follow the rules, and when do you bend the rules to reach for a higher moral victory? He's on suspension because a friend of his, an old dear family friend, a man in his almost in his 70s, called him one night to say that there was a member of the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas on his property and he might be about to shoot this man. And Darren saw this 70-year-old black man giving up his entire life over this crazy tattooed cracker and went, you don't do this. And when he went out there to stop this guy and to talk him down off the ledge, basically saying this guy's not worth it, and runs off the guy from the Aryan Brotherhood who was harassing the older gentleman's granddaughter who's like 19. And when everything is finally calmed down and Darren ends up staying, again, that feeling of stand your ground, he sits on the man's front porch all night, keeping watch with his Colt in his lap, just to make sure that he's safe and make sure everything's going to be okay tonight. Well, 2 days later, that member of the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas comes up dead. And when it gets out that Darren was present for some shenanigans and things that went down, and that the weapon that the Aryan Brotherhood guy was killed with is the same caliber of weapon this older black gentleman was pointing that night, it turns into a thing where that older black gentleman, there's a grand jury to decide whether or not he possibly killed this man. And Darren, if he tells you the truth, does not give a shit that this crazy, virulent racist is dead. I mean, he's not proud of the fact that he feels that way, but he actually feels that way. Nor does he think if this 7-year-old black man lost it this night and killed somebody who's also killed other people, I don't know how I feel about that. And so he's very conflicted about how much he should stand up with the law enforcement to point a finger at his family friend.
And the guy's also a CI, right?
Yeah, the guy who got killed was an informant for the FBI. That came out of the research that I did, that the Rangers had a actually very successful task force in the last 3 to 5 years with the FBI and the DEA trying to take down the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas. And so once I started researching the Rangers and trying to figure out what do they do on any given Monday when you should go to work at Ranger headquarters, what do you do? When I started realizing that a lot of their work, or some of their work, was entangled with the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas, that got really interesting to me, and it felt like it was, like the 21st century Klan. And it just was interesting to me. And of course, I wrote this entire book before Donald Trump was elected. So I remember very, very vividly feeling queasy, obviously, but also feeling like my book had changed overnight, even though I hadn't changed a word. It just suddenly was it would be released into a different landscape. Some of that stuff was already afoot. There's a line in the book where he's talking about his uncle's generation and having to act a certain way, having to carry yourself as a certain way, in a certain way as a person of color in the South, and that he had hoped that they would be the last generation to have to worry about walking down the street, leading to your death potentially. But and that I think the line is something like that. He hoped that change would trickle down from the White House but that the opposite had proven true, and that in the wake of Obama, America had told on itself. So I already had a sense when I was writing this that we all saw, on the other side of Obama, even before he was about to be ushered out. I've said before when people have asked me, The Guardian asked me about Obama's legacy, and I said what I hoped at the time. It's no intelligent human being anymore can act like we're not dealing with a massive race problem anymore. And that a perverse gift of his legacy is that it's almost like a sickness that's bubbled up on the skin like a boil. You can't pretend like it's not there anymore. Now, did I think that boil would become cancerous and it would you would have somebody in the White House over here saying, don't treat it, it's great, we love this. I didn't see all that coming, but yes, I was stirred up with a lot of these feelings while writing the book.
And some of the small towns, once you get off the main drag, as you write in the book, it's like Jim Crow. Is it really gone?
It is, and but some of that too is, I have to admit, I'm learning that some of that too is a stereotype, and that's what's so confusing. Is that some people, I'm sure I'm coming across mean me harm. There are a lot that do not at all. And in fact, when I go back to Texas, and when I go, my family, my dad rebuilt a house on the land that my grandmother was born on, and that I actually had two identical twin great uncles. There were this big part of my dad's family that a lot of them were raised and born on this land, and my dad rebuilt a house there. And the nearest town is Cold Spring. Cold Spring, it's a big deal. They have a subway. That is like a huge deal. It's a tiny little town, and when I walk around there and I look at certain folks, and when they have a picture of like, I want to go redneck, I go like this, like, this is going to be bad. My dad's way of dealing with these situations is when he sees somebody, he walks into a grocery store, he'll be like, how you doing, man? I like your boobs. Or, nice day. But what he's doing is twofold. He's letting them know, I don't have a problem with you. And he's figuring out if they have a problem with him real fast. And his way is to just not assume that everybody's out to get you. Just give it a second, and you can kind of tell. And what is striking is that there are so many people for whom the just interpersonal small town affection is genuine. I was back in Texas researching my second book, and what was disturbing, though, about this very thing I'm saying is that I knew statistically that I was in Trump country. So even though I felt genuine warmth from people around me, I remember I was eating at some fish house near Attica Lake, and somebody bought my lunch. I went to go pay, and the lady said, oh, it's been taken care of. I thought, that's crazy. Everybody hears them so nice. But again, statistically, I was in Trump country, so that meant that even if people can have genuine affection for their neighbors on the street, people down there still voted to uphold white supremacy. Those two things were true. And that made me really uncomfortable. It's just all complicated. And you can't completely write it off as everything down there is you're going to be lynched the second you get off the highway. It's not actually true. And then there are some places where I can feel it. There's a town called Jefferson. I don't know what the hell's wrong with this place. So every time I've ever visited, I do not feel like I need to be staying there long. I just have a bad feeling about Jefferson. Now, it could be that on the way into Jefferson, there's this one guy, everybody sells antique shit off the highway in the country. This one guy actually has, I've driven by it many, many times, he has two black lawn jockeys waving Confederate flags. And it just makes your stomach turn when you see it. It's so twisted and sick.
Well, you talk about in the book, there's a little example of what you call microaggression with somebody's business.
Yes, I said that because in the book, Darren has to get stopped at a store because he just needs something, and the store is called Kay's Country Kitchen.
All K's.
And I'm laughing about that because let me tell you this. So my husband is white. So when you are married to a white person, they start pointing out shit that you don't see. Like, I thought I saw everything. In Houston, there's a radio station called KIKK. And when they write it, it looks like boots. They write the case like little boots, and I was like, and my husband went, "Nah, that's not what that is. That's clan. That's code. That's a clear dog whistle." I was like, "What? No, those are little cowboy boots. It's in Houston, where I grew up with KIKK, and I just thought, but you don't see. They call it Kick FM, and all you think is, oh, that's so cute, them little boots." And my husband went, "No, that's the Klan." So then I started realizing, you know what? There is a profligate use of the letter K in Texas. Walking by and everything. It just makes me nervous.
Well, it's also, if it's done in a cutesy way, that somehow makes it more menacing.
I just find it. There's a lot of coded, and you pay attention to it. But actually, when I go back to little Cold Spring, Texas, where my family's land is, I actually don't see that many Confederate flags at all. Whereas in Jefferson, I see a lot. And I just pay attention to that kind of stuff. But yeah.
Well, let's nerd out for a moment on Texas blues.
Okay.
All right, yeah. Probably bore you guys for a second. But the title of the book comes from a John Lee Hooker song.
Yes.
Not Texas necessarily, but there's a lot of references to blues music in this book, and you made the point of saying that white Texas is country music,
right,
and black Texas
is
the blues.
Yeah.
There's such a great tradition there.
But you know what? Those two are fraternal twins too.
Yeah,
they're in fact, growing up in my grandmother's house, she had one of those that must have been so fancy in the late '60s or the '70s. One of the intercom systems in your house, and it played the radio. And there wasn't in Lufkin, Texas, in the early to mid '70s, there wasn't really black radio that you could be listening to during the day. You might be able to pick up a station coming from someplace else. So I grew up with Johnny Cash in the house. I grew up with Hank Williams in the house. I grew up with Patsy Cline in the house. And I can still hear it and feel like I can still go to my grandmother's house when I hear some country music. So, and the older I get, the line between the two is getting really blurry for me, and I find myself. It's not all country because I don't need I can't take that real America kind of stuff. That's not for me. But a Chris Stapleton, that's me. I can deal with that because it's blues, and it's also country that is asking big existential questions. I like Sturgill Simpson. I've started to really get into that kind of country, but I'm a blues person at heart. I mean, that's just my I grew up on blues, and first I consider Lightnin' Hopkins my muse. He is the person I want to be on paper. I want to be spare and funny and wise and humble. I just adore him. And
he had such style too.
Just such style, and just for me it has that agrarian quality to it still. I mean, like the epigraph to the book is from Tom Moore Blues. Also him somebody saying no. There's a lot of theme of just black folks saying, yeah, no, we're not doing that.
And he kind of straddled the line between acoustic blues and electric blues.
Yes. Yeah, so I'm just a big fan of his, and I love Freddie King. I'm embarrassed to say I discovered Little Milton while I was writing this. I actually didn't know his work, but and even the more R&B kind of blues I grew up with at family reunions and stuff, like Johnny Taylor and stuff like that. So that's all that's all in the book, and part of it was to sell the tone and the mood, but also music is a part of the plot. So yeah.
And you give a big shout out to Charlie Pride. He's
very unique,
I do. Of all the black country people I know of, I never got into Hootie when he flipped over. What's his name? Darius Rucker?
Yeah.
I don't know. But there's a little black girl named, I shouldn't know, but I'm 43, so I guess I can call her a little girl if she's 19. Her name is Mickey Guyton. I kind of got into her. You've heard of her? I've kind of gotten into her. But Charlie Pride, you just have to love that kind of ballsiness that you were just in the 50s and 60s, like, fuck it, I'm sorry. I'm just going to be black and I'm going to be just singing country music. I mean, that is just incredible.
Ray Charles did it too.
Ray Charles did it too.
Did some country records.
He did, but it's one thing to have some country records while you still have them on dark shades and you still look like you rolled out of a club.
Right.
And it's another thing to like have the hat and the boots and the whole thing. But, you know, my dad wears cowboy boots every day of his life with his suit. I grew up with grandparents wearing boots. I grew up with hats and pickup trucks and
well, you
all
got
of
someone
that.
like Clarence Gatemouth Brown,
Yeah.
who's like a Texan to the core.
Yeah. And I just understand it. I feel like I understand those people. I feel like if I looked up at a family reunion and I saw Clarence Gatemouth Brown, I'd be like, oh, you fit right in. Like, it's kind of, like I said, I come from Texans that go back to slavery. Yeah. So, yeah.
When did Gatemouth Brown die? It wasn't too long ago.
I actually don't know.
Because he used to come and play at the Rhythm Room. I don't know if anybody saw him.
Yeah, I saw him once.
Did you? Yeah. I saw Arl Burnside once, and that was
Yeah,
awesome.
I saw him.
But sorry to nerd out on that.
But I think if you do like blues, I hope that you like the book because there's a lot of blues in it. Yeah.
Let's open up to questions. I'm sure you have some.
Yes, sir.
Well, I think maybe to start, keep it up. I mean, I think you really are. I just started reading the book, but you know, you're obviously raising things, and as you said, there's the cancers on for everybody to see. So I mean, in a way, I don't think that's exactly the point of the book, but you're covering a lot of these issues, so certainly keep it up.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, does it? At this point, do you either have movie or TV potential? Because it's just such a. These issues are so current.
I'm the potential.
Okay.
Patrick asked me back here, he's like, if you option this to anybody, I said to myself, I wrote myself an invisible check to option my book. The plan is, so I was on Empire from the very beginning for 3 years, and then when it was time to renew my contract, I just chose not to. I wanted to make space to do other stuff. And part of that is doing my own show. And there is a feeling that this might be it, and I hope so. And so, I hope so. Yes.
Your other two books are based in Louisiana. What made you decide to write something about Texas?
No, that's not. My only one book was in Louisiana, the cutting season.
Oh.
Yeah, only that one. The other two actually are in Houston, so they feel more urban. Than this is super rural, whatever. But it's just because I firmly believe I became a writer on Highway 59, and what I mean by that is, you know, Southerners, you're gonna go see some relatives on the weekend. I mean, that's usually gonna be doing that. So I would say at least 2 weekends out of the month, we were driving up to see folks. And so to see my grandmother, to see aunts and uncles. And this is, you know, clearly pre-iPads in the backseat or iPhones or anything. And I could never read in a car because it makes me want to puke. So what I had was my imagination. And so I vividly remember riding through these towns and them passing by really fast, but you catch a glimpse of something interesting. You catch a glimpse of somebody's little beauty box, you know, beauty salon run out of their trailer. You come across, you know, a huge cattle ranch and you think, God, that looks like Dallas. And, you know, I would just make up stories about the stuff that I saw that was passing by. And that was as a girl. And so when I was working, I was in season 2 of Empire when I came up with the idea for the season, and I wrote a book proposal to just see if somebody wanted to help me publish it. I had a profound feeling of wanting to go home. That as much fun as Empire is one of the most fun things I've ever done in my entire life, but it could not be more different than who I fundamentally am. I don't know that much about hip hop. I was always the one in the room like, who? The Weeknd is a what? That's the Weeknd. What are you talking about? I don't know any. I couldn't name one Kendrick Lamar song. I could just, except the one that's on Beyonce's album. And I don't know about, like, you know, the idea of Lucius and Cookie come out of the drug world. I don't know anything about New York and all this kind of stuff. And I just, as much fun as I was having, I just felt like I want to go home. I want to go home.
Now, does Highway 59 go to Nacogdoches? Does it
Yeah.
go through Nacogdoches?
Yeah, we used to call it Saccaroaches.
Saccaroaches. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Joe Lansdale. You know,
Yes, yes.
Does anybody know his books? Fantastic writer.
Yeah, and his show is Happen Leonard,
Happen
right?
Leonard. Yeah. What a great.
Yeah.
Great.
I hope he doesn't feel like I'm horning in on his territory.
No. No. But, you know, he writes a lot about East Texas,
Yeah.
in particular that Nacogdoches area. And what an interesting history that whole area had as far as, like, being a crossroads for like weird like medicine shows and
Yes,
parties
yes,
and
yes.
all revivals, going
Yeah.
through that part of the state.
Yeah, definitely.
Has Empire? I'm sorry. Lorraine.
That's okay.
Has Empire the experience of writing for TV kind of affected? Did it affect the way you went back to approach your fiction?
Yes, the whole reason that this is a series is because I worked on a TV show, and I gained a really big appreciation for hanging out with a character for a while. I never thought to do that before, and so that in that way it had a really big impact on me. Yeah.
Just on the nuts and bolts of how to tell the story, did it affect it much?
The only thing that happens is two things happen. In the beginning, when I first started writing, I felt really rusty, like I hadn't written a book in a couple of years. I would realize, like I would just be writing like really slimly. I was like, Attica, wait a minute. There's no camera here. You have to describe what this room looks like. I was being kind of lazy because in scripts, you just go into your whatever and you just keep going. And I had to remember, I've got to paint all this. Okay, so I have to remember that. And the other thing is that coming out of a writer's room, I had everybody in the writer's room in my head arguing about what I should do and I shouldn't do, because that's all we do in a writer's room is argue about story points and how things should be done and this, that, and the other. I kept hearing people, you could do it that way, you could do it. And it was really hard to shut all that up and remember I was writing this book, not the whole writing staff of Empire, and I had to
Was
push
it good
that
to
up.
have like a little devil's advocate back there
In
somewhere?
a way, but I'm afraid to say that I'm afraid to give
The devil is due.
Yeah, thank you, because I worry it'll take over. I'm so neurotic anyway. I don't need an extra. I don't need extra drama.
Attica.
No.
Yeah.
I have an evil one that hangs out with me. She's mean. I have a really mean inner critic. We're working on it in therapy.
Sorry, Lorraine.
Well, I was just going to let you know Charlie Pride has a home here at Sun City Grand, spends the winter here.
He does?
He does. I used to work at a penny store, and one of my customers used to have, I think they golfed together, and then they'd have lunch
He's still
together.
with us.
So
He is alive. Charlie Bride's still alive.
Yes, I saw him in concert in 1969. A packed house. He sang until, it was the most wonderful show I've ever seen.
Here in Phoenix?
Mm-hmm.
Was it?
In the
Wow.
old Coliseum. And it was standing room only. They said the fire department would have had a fit if they knew how many people were actually in there that night. And he just
He's a
sang
beautiful
for it.
voice.
Oh, it was wonderful.
And I, in particular, when he sings gospel, it's pretty incredible. Yeah.
Have you guys ever heard of Reverend Louis Overstreet for Phoenix? He was this, again, I'm going off on a tangent, but he was this wonderful kind of like gospel one-man band. He played like a Stratocaster guitar, and there was one album done. It was recorded in South Phoenix in the 60s on like Arhoolie Records, and it is fantastic. Yeah, Reverend Louis
Reverend Louis
Overstreet.
Overstreet.
There's some cool YouTube stuff of him. It's obviously in some church. He's just wailing. It's really fun.
Charlie
digress.
Pride got his start in Montana, where I'm from. He played minor league ball. In
Really?
Great Falls.
See, you know more than I do. You know so much.
And he started singing at a bar in Helena, Montana. And that's way back in late 50s, early 60s.
Oh, that's ballsy. That's ballsy. We will talk about it after. I'm distracted by looking at Stephen King's It.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm just wondering if I should get that. I'm really scared of clowns. Yes, sir.
Now, you mentioned a little bit, but I'm just curious, did you work with the Texas Rangers and some, do they kind of offer you cooperation on character?
No, I talked to one and he didn't even say. I was so deferential. I talked to Lieutenant, and I was so deferential, just thinking that he would be very cagey. But he actually, now that the book is out, maybe he won't take my calls anymore. But he was just very generous and not in any way. I was thinking, what do I call you? Do I call you Ranger Westmoreland? And he would just call me Ranger. He was just so gentle and genuine about it, and he answered all my questions and didn't seem guarded. Like, I thought he would be so guarded about the way they do things, but not at all. Now, I have to have the thought that should I be fortunate enough that this becomes a television show, when you're dealing with the visuals and stuff like that, I think there'd have to be some overture that's made. But who knows? I mean, I tried to do the best that I could from talking to him, and I got my hands on a bunch of Ranger newsletters. So that felt like a kind of insider kind of culture. And then I had books by Rangers, and so that was what I did. And then the rest, I truly gave myself permission to make stuff up. And that actually might be the influence of television too. And also coming off of Pleasantville. When I was writing Pleasantville, I don't know how many people have read it. It is a monster. And I remember as I was writing, going, the next thing better be a lot lighter than this. and Pleasantville has so much legal stuff in it, and so I think there was fun in loosening up my grip on everything has to be so literally exactly as it would happen, or you can't put it in there. I felt much more like this book has a Lone Star swagger, and so it has a kind of tall tale quality to it, and I gave myself permission to color outside the lines, so to speak.
Right.
I'm sorry to keep asking questions, but how about in Texas? What kind of reaction are you getting? Reviews?
Well, 2 great reviews in the Dallas Morning News and the Houston Chronicle. The reviews have actually been unanimously wonderful. I've been so lucky, the quotes that I got. It seems to really speak to people, and of course, evil Attica gets nervous about following up. I get really kind of panicky about then what.
That's a good segue to my next question. So what do you have planned next?
What I have planned next is there's some Hollywood stuff that I'm working on. I've been working on what an adaptation of this would look like, and prepping for meetings and stuff. And then I'm writing book 2. And book 2 actually takes place in and around that one town I told you I get really nervous around, which is Jefferson. So that's and it's in and around Jefferson in a place called Caddo Lake. Caddo Lake is like nothing else in the country. It is a lake that is 25 square miles. So it covers part of Texas and Louisiana. You can get in a boat and go from Texas to Louisiana. And it looks like a flooded cypress forest. It's just
Alligators and cottonmouths.
Yep.
All kinds of
all
fun.
of it. All of it. And also this kind of a strange kind of history of an outlaw culture, because it was before there were real game wardens going on. People could hide. Caddo Lake is so big there were islands, and people could hide out. So there was a lot of outlaw people. Like, I'm running from somebody, I'm just going to park it on the island and live off some fish for a while. There was illegal oyster selling. There was I think drugs have gone through there. It's just it's an interesting.
A little
kind of
something
place.
for everybody.
Oh. A little something for everybody.
Was it active in Prohibition? Was there a lot going on?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was a lot of bootlegging.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Anybody?
I just have a question about your name. I love your name.
Thank you.
Was that somebody else in your family?
No, I was named after the prison uprising.
That's what
Yeah. I was born, so the uprising was in 71. I was actually born in 74. Both my parents were activists. So that by the time I came out, I don't know, my mom just was still thinking about Attica, I guess. It just came out. And the way she tells it, it's another way of saying no. That they're just, because what the prisoner said is there's a certain thing we're just going to say no to. And what I got out of it, the older I get, I understand that the lesson is that there is a certain base level of humanity that we're just not going to go beneath. We're not going to, even the worst of us, we are still going to treat like human beings.
Right.
And so I have a great appreciation for that being given the name. It was the 70s and people were, black folks who were politically active. It was the time for naming. I mean, my sister's name is Timby. Her full name is Timby Keeley. She was named by Miriam Makeba because my dad was in Africa with Stokely working on the Pan-African movement maybe 6 months before she was born. And they gave, no, it had to have been closer to the birth. So it must have been like 4 months or so before my sister was born. And so she gave the name. And so it was just a lot of this culture of naming. But yeah, they were deep in it. I mean, they're too old. Too young to have been truly a part of the civil rights movement in the sense of, the beautiful people in pressed slacks and the cardigan sweaters at the countertops. They were past all that. And so it was certainly about integrating the University of Houston. They got involved in local political stuff in Houston. My dad heavily got involved in the Pan-African freedom movement. They were not Panthers, because my dad, to this day, this is going to come out wrong, but my dad is just frankly not that angry. And he just isn't fundamentally a black nationalist. He just felt like that was another twist on the same kind of thing. It still had that same kind of harsh ideology and hierarchy and hierarchical thinking that he just didn't quite agree with. Did he do some stuff with the Panthers? Yes, because in fact, in my first book, I don't know who's read Blackwater Rising.
I did.
But that story of the Stokely and Jay Porter riding in a VW after his speech at U of H, and then they ride up to Austin that night. That happened. That is my dad and Stokely were in a VW Bug, trying to take back roads around to get around, because the Klan had threatened to catch them on the road. And they were not friends or anything, but when Stokely heard that this man, Gene Locke, this young man, was doing this stuff around the Pan-African movement, he wanted to come through, and his first speech in Texas was at U of H. And then they rode on to Austin. So, yeah, I mean, my parents weren't, and also the Panthers weren't really heavy in tech. Like, that's not really like a thing. They weren't really that heavy there, but my mom is, I don't know about infinitely more militant, but my dad, just has a bit of a good bullshit detector, and there is a thing where you can say that, and it's not, I might be being profoundly unfair, because of the good works, that there are good works that the Black Panthers did, but there is a sense that in the movement, I'm not using capital M movement, I'm saying in the movement from what King was doing and from what the early movement was doing, which was empowering kind of individuals, whereas the Panthers moved really into a kind of hierarchical iconography kind of worship thing with Huey on the thing and this, and it was incredibly violent internally. It was incredibly sexist. But I'm gonna give them this: the country was buck ass wild by then. How many people the government is just shooting? I mean, at a certain point, I understand that like, if you've ever read Elaine Brown's book, Taste of Power, she was running the Panthers for a minute. It was just wild. Eldridge Cleaver was trying to kill her in China, but at a certain point, if you are living in a country where people are just being dropped by your government, at a certain point, even the best intentions kind of go sideways, and I think there was a lot of that going on.
Were you a Chester Himes fan?
A little bit. I admit I'm embarrassed to say I haven't read him.
Really?
I've read him. I have not read more of him.
Because he had that, I love his books, but he had that final one that was unfinished called Plan B, which was what he was proposing if Plan A failed,
And what was Plan B going to be? I need to read it. I need to read it. Yeah.
No, but I love that worldview of just this absurd.
Well, what the way my dad described, and I've studied the movement pretty closely. I worked for a while on an HBO project with Taylor Branch, so I literally sat next to a world-renowned historian about this stuff. And so I know a lot about the movement. And what my dad was describing, by the time you get to like 1969, you get 70, 71, 72, it was wild. And he tells me stories about going to a meeting in New York and everybody kind of having to check their guns in a thing in order for people to have this meeting. It was like, they were worried that everybody thought everybody was a rat because of COINTELPRO. It was wild. So I actually give a huge benefit of the doubt for the fact that when you hear stories about the internal works of the Panthers being kind of like everybody was off, but it was crazy making. It was absolutely crazy making where the government is infiltrating all your stuff. It was a wild time.
And the art and music that came out of that,
right,
was so unbelievably good.
Yeah.
It's a weird thing, with times of uncertainty and all this great art comes out as a result.
Yeah. But it was interesting. My dad was on trial in 1970 for inciting a riot, and is firmly convinced, and that's probably a little bit where the character Cynthia Maddox came from. My dad is, he wasn't dating this woman, but my dad is firmly convinced that it was members of the SDS that went in and stoked stuff and then fled, and he's the one who, he and his best friend got arrested in 1970. Yeah.
Is he still with us? Your
My dad? Oh yeah, I just saw him last night.
Cool.
Yeah.
He was arrested, but was he?
He was on trial. Yeah, he was on trial for inciting a riot in 1970. Yeah.
Was it federal, state, what?
No, it must have been state. It was at the state level, but a lot of the stuff that's in Blackwater Rising is borrowed from my dad's
I was
life.
gonna say, are they
Oh.
characters?
Yeah, that character is a Jay Porter is a sketch
Yeah.
of my dad,
Oh, really?
and that image of a single black juror looking at him like, "I got you," it was similar to that. That there was somebody on the jury that was just like, I'm not going to let you boys go down." It's wild times, wild times.
And
Yeah.
we are in wild
And now he's a
times
corporate
again.
lawyer, so the movement is way over. Yes, sir.
I was in Texas this summer, just meeting family, but we went through the Texas State Capitol,
Yeah.
and there's a big plaque with all of the black legislators from 1865 to like 1900, and then it stopped for
Yeah.
60 years.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious, was your family in that? They're in that phase? Have they been there that long when there was black participation?
In Reconstruction, I have no. In terms of our looking back, I know that we've been here just from jump. From like slavery, but I have no in our family history and the historical work that some family members are doing. We've never found that we had members of the family who were part of that part of Reconstruction, like being part of the political system. Of course, since then I have, judges and people who were pretty politically involved in my family, but not from back then. But yeah, that was a crazy thing about Reconstruction, that there was a minute there, where
It was just so striking.
It is incredibly striking.
All these men, and then
Yeah.
it cuts off, and 3 generations later,
yeah.
the next black person.
Yeah, because that's when they came in with the poll taxes and the Klan rose up and
Well, it has been a real delight this
Me
evening.
too.
Maybe we'll break up and have you sign some books for
Happy
us.
to do
And,
so.
let's give her a nice warm.
Thank you guys for coming out. On this hot summer night.
Yeah.
Oh, is it even summer anymore?
Oh, yeah.
Summer, it's